Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, I'm gonna call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks related content, where there are 4 new premium tanks that Wargaming do currently have on the Super Test server, and we're gonna talk about them a little bit. There are at least 2 Soviet tanks, actually 3, but one of them is in the German tech tree, and 1 British little light tank. 2 of them are, or actually, everyone is in there except for artillery. You have a TD, you have a medium tank, you have a tank destroyer, and you have a heavy tank and you have a light tank. So let's take a look at the Harry Hopkins. This is supposed to be a tier 4 light tank with, I presume, a 20 millimeter cannon. With 121 millimeters of penetration at tier 4. That's pretty impressive. And it's supposed to be a Crusader turret that they've just fitted on some kind of weird light tank. And this light tank actually isn't even that fast. 50 kph top speed going forward, 18 kph in reverse, but it also shouldn't weigh too much. As you can see right here, only 200 horsepower, but very, very good specific power to weight ratio, 23.1 horsepower per ton. This seems to be somewhat of a fun little tank. Like, it's very lightly armored, doesn't have a lot of hit points, but it has a very nice little gun that is fairly inaccurate, but it seems to be able to fire at an astonishing high rate of fire. So this could be something neat, something interesting. And what I think, generally speaking, is that all 4 of these tanks will appear in this year's Christmas loot boxes. SU1, the SU2 122, the Panzerkampfwagen 5, or the Panzerkampfwagen KW1 or KV1, and the Harry Hopkins one, and finally the Object 283. So let's move on to the Panzerkampfwagen KV1. This is basically a KV1 that the Germans captured during World War II, where they actually took out the 76 millimeter gun that the Soviets packed in, and they put a PAK 75 L40 48 onto the turret. This tank is one of my favorites in War Thunder. It's a lot of fun. It's extremely broken at that tier when you're playing it in War Thunder, and it's going to be a tier 5 premium tank in World of Tanks in the near future. So what you get is you have the 75 millimeter Packkanone, so German accuracy, 0.37 dispersion at 100 meters, not too bad. Aim time 2.5 seconds, reload time is 3.9 seconds. Your armor penetration isn't that great with the standard AP shells, but with APCR you have 162 millimeters of penetration. The damage is 110, which I guess is not too much, but you have 10 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation, so you're not looking down into the drain when you have to fight on ridgelines. So you probably already have quite a bit of a little bit of a improved KV1, because I'm pretty sure that the KV1 doesn't have 10 degrees of gun depression at tier 5. Top speed is 34 kph. Top speed in reverse is 10 kph. You have 500 horsepower and a pretty lackluster 9.8 horsepower per ton. Hull traverse and turret traverse are both not very good since it's a heavy tank, but I think it's quite an interesting one because it's a KV1 with a German gun, and I think this is definitely one of the premium tanks that they should be adding into the game. I would much rather have it in the tech tree, but I can understand why it's a premium one, because it's a little bit of a rare tank, and it's a very interesting kind of historical vehicle, because the Germans actually wanted to add German gun onto it, and they were not satisfied with the Soviet 76 millimeter gun that the KV1 had at that time, and they probably didn't have enough ammunition, so they switched over to their own guns, which makes a lot of sense, but makes the KV1 look a little bit like a mutant, which certainly is like one of those side effects you have when you splice 2 things together that are not supposed to match, but they somehow match. So a very interesting vehicle right there. But the most interesting vehicle in the list right here today is the SU2 122. It's the one tank where I'm actually quite interested in seeing how it plays out. It's a tier 5 tank destroyer with a double barrel 122 millimeter howitzer gun. you can see that these are two howitzers. There is no turret. It's like one big box, and it's kind of like they spliced a KV2 turret on top of a T-34, and they just kind of made it a bit wider, and they added a second gun into it. Instead of being at a 152 millimeter howitzer, it's 122, but you have two of them. So it sounds really interesting, and I think from the stats, it might be a very interesting vehicle to see on the battlefield. It looks like fun, it sounds like fun, and we're going to take a look into the characteristics right now. 450 damage with the high explosive shell, which is the standard shell, and 370 with the heat shells, which are the premium shells. The armor penetration, as you can see, are quite different. 61 on the high explosive shells and 140 on the heat shells. So we can already see which shell people will be using most of the time, and I think it's going to be the heat shell. But at tier 5, 61 millimeters of penetration, there are going to be some times where you're going to be facing tier 4 tanks, even tier 3. And I think this tank will be quite horrible to face when you're in a tier 4. Interestingly enough, it's a auto loader, double barrel gun, as you would imagine it. 12-second reload time for both guns. And a salvo preparation is 4 seconds. You have to wait 4 seconds to be able to fire both rounds. And if you fire one gun and you want to fire the second gun, you have to wait 3 seconds in between the shots. Now, the gun changing time... Oh, no, this is actually the reload clock time. A reload lock time, so excuse me. So if you fire both shells, you will have a reload lock of 3 seconds afterwards. So it's going to be a grand total of 15 seconds until you can fire again. Now, the interesting thing is that the gun changing time is 7 seconds. So you're not going to be able to fire the one gun immediately after you fire the second gun. Or you cannot fire the second gun after you fired the first gun. So you have to wait 7 seconds in between. So that's quite a long time. So I think Wargaming want you to play this tank more by firing salvos, because like the gun changing time is just not really worth it if you just look at the stats. But we have to see what this tank is like in the game, and I'm going to be really interested in seeing just what the SU-2-122 is going to be capable of. Now, the aim time and dispersion actually aren't too bad, to be fair, for this kind of caliber of a gun. 3 seconds, that's completely fine in my opinion. 0.48, I expected it to be worse, but 0.48 actually, you can still hit some shots. Now, I'm not expecting the shell velocity to be good, but we're going to be seeing a very interesting tank coming into the game. 6 degrees of gun depression, not the best, but I wouldn't expect anything else. 15 degrees of gun elevation, which is fine. Ammo capacity is 40 pieces, and your turret traverse is quite atrocious with only 16 degrees per... no, wait. Turret traverse angle, so it's only the 16 degrees you have. So you can go 8 degrees to the left, 8 degrees to the right maybe, or maybe you can only go into one direction, could be. Maximum forward speed is 45 kph, which is quite interesting actually, it's not too bad. 14 kph in reverse speed, so yeah, that's not going to be very good. 500 horsepower, so your specific power to weight ratio is 14.5 horsepower per ton. I think you can upgrade that with a turbo if you can actually place a turbo on a tier 5. I don't recall being able to do that, but I'd have to check into the game. Yeah, if you would be able to put a turbo on it, could be quite interesting. Hull traverse 35 degrees per second, which is not too bad for tank destroyer. Gun traverse speed is 30 degrees per second, but you only have the 16 degrees where you can swivel the gun. So yeah, that's not going to be really interesting, but 30 degrees, I think you can live with that. Now, total hit points are going to be quite low, 480 HP. This is a Soviet tank destroyer. It's not going to have a lot of HP, and that's that. Hull armor is not going to be very good, 45 millimeters all around, and you have a little bit of a slope on the hull because it's a T-34 hull, but the turret itself, or the chassis where the guns are mounted, is very flat, and that's actually quite interesting. 280 meters base view range is also quite atrocious, so you probably have to invest a little bit into the distance to be able to see something. Now to the most boring tank probably on the list. It's another tier 9 Soviet premium tank, the Object 283. It has a rear mounted turret, And I think a 100mm gun that we have seen quite a few times now, I think it could be similar to the gun on the K91. 360 damage, 226mm of penetration with the AP shell, 300 with the heat shell, and I'm not really sure, 50mm with the high explosive shell. Now the reload time is actually quite bad, 9.4 seconds for a 100mm gun. Not that great. Aim time and dispersion are okay, but you certainly have to improve dispersion values to make this a valuable kind of sniping vehicle. What is much more interesting is probably the armor, but we're going to talk about the armor in just a second. 6 degrees of gun depression, 20 degrees of gun elevation. Gun elevation is great. Gun depression is about the bare minimum. You carry 50 shots with this tank, 50 rounds, which is fine. Max speed is 50 kph going forwards, 18 kph going backwards, 17.9 horsepower per ton, which is fine. With the mobility, with the turbo, you can get it up to 20 about if you're lucky. Hull traverse, turret traverse are both fine. Hull traverse is pretty good, but the turret traverse is lacking a little bit for a medium tank. It does have full turnaround for the turret. It doesn't seem to have any restrictions in terms of being able to turn your turret on an axis like 360 degrees. So I think you can turn the turret fully around the tank and you don't have to worry about kind of restrictions in that area. At least from the stats, we don't see anything. Now, survivability, on the other hand, 1700 HP. That is the bare minimum for a tier 9 medium tank, in my opinion. Hull armor, though, on the other hand, 190mm thick at the front. That's quite impressive. 80 on the side, which is also going to be quite good. So you're not going to be overmatched easily with 80mm, and 45 at the rear. Turret armor is 190 at the front, 110 on the sides, and 60 at the back. We don't know if it has a very apparent cupola, but it does seem to have a cupola on top of the tank. So maybe that's a way to go through, or maybe you can just go through the cheeks with 190mm of armor. That's actually not the highest amount of armor on a turret, so that could be an option for us. The view range is lacking though. 380 meter space view range for a tier 9 medium tank is just simply not good enough, but I think you can work with it if you do invest a little bit. This seems to be like a premium version for the Soviet K91 line. And I think that except for maybe the turret traverse, everything else seems to be a bit more lackluster than the Object 432. But we'll have to see. I think generally speaking, I'm not really interested in the Object 283. I'm much more interested in the SU-2 122 because it seems to have something special. The Panzerkampfwagen KV-1 is also quite interesting, and the Harry Hopkins looks like a little fun tank. So we'll see what these things will be like when they come out. Everything is still subject to change, so nothing is final yet. So keep that in mind. I just wanted to represent and preview some of the things that are coming and what they have in store. And I'm expecting this to be in the Christmas loot boxes. It looks like it's a perfect kind of, quadruplet that you're going to put in the loot box and people will be buying them. Because having a tier 9, having like some interesting low tier premiums, I think that's what people probably will pick up when they get the loot boxes. And I'm pretty sure that we'll see these tanks this year still. So hopefully you guys did enjoy. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Until then, have a good one and enjoy the weekend.